Order. It is 9:39. I do apologize for the delay. We were having some computer issues, but we are ready to go now. I just want to say good morning to the School District of Indian River County, our parents, and our community residents. Today is Tuesday, July 21st, and this is our budget workshop. We are practicing social distancing at the time. We do have our boardroom open if you want to come in and sit, and it's safely 6 feet apart. And at this current time, we do have 2 board members present today. We have Mrs. Berenborg and then Mrs. Justice, and then via Teams we have Mrs. Rosario and Dr. Schiff. Good morning. So at this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore so that we can get into the substance of this meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Began my morning at Storm Grove Middle School, where we kicked off our Reignite Professional Development. This is the opportunity for all of our leadership teams to come together, appropriately social distance, using 8 different rooms across the campus. I know we have a very busy day, but the energy and excitement at Storm Grove Middle School is very high, as each leadership team will spend 2 intense days of planning and development, looking at their school improvement process, looking at the barriers in which they're going to have to address for the upcoming school year. So if you have any time today in between our 3 different meetings and you need to fill your tank, moving over and seeing some of the energy and excitement at Storm Grove Middle School, I would highly recommend. Really a great way to start my morning. Today is the budget workshop, and this is an opportunity to us to have the initial review of the upcoming budget. Mr. Fagan will provide that update for you. I just want to commend the work of Mr. Fagan, because he will not brag on himself, so I will do it for him. Over the course of this year, he has done an absolutely tremendous job in right-sizing or writing our budget, and I don't know how else to say it, but when you look at what has been accomplished over the course of the year, 2 different superintendents, walking into a position where there was no chief financial officer for an extended amount of time, some inconsistencies in terms of implementation, and then looking at what was corrected or modified. And I've said it a number of times, probably publicly. Mr. Fagan's first conversation with me was, hello, I'm Mr. Fagan, your chief financial officer. We're going to be $2 to $4 million short, and this is in January. And the reality is, based on his leadership, his expertise, we are in a situation that doesn't nearly reflect what that reality was in January. And as we've done this work, I think there's some things that we should highlight. We have been able to come under contract, which in previous years we were not. We were able to provide compensation for the previous school year as well as this school year with our teachers union. We were able to come under contract with our CWA union and compensate both for last year and this year with this particular budget. Last year's budget, we were able to compensate our non-bargaining representatives who had gone 4 years without compensation with last year's budget, and still end in a very positive manner when you look at everything that we had to bring on to ourselves. So I'm very excited about the leadership Mr. Fagan has provided, and very excited for him to dive into the upcoming budget, and looking forward to having the opportunity to answer any questions each and every single one of you may have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Superintendent. To the chair, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? You should have a nice, healthy book. It's a nice, healthy budget, weighs about 5.5 pounds. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of things that were some changes from prior discussions that we'd had regarding the budget. The budget started over 6 months ago. That's when we started in really talking about SAM. How would we implement SAM? What will it do to the schools? How will the schools understand this, and how will this translate? Well, that was implemented and fully executed for 2021. It's the first one. It's the first child. Sometimes you baby the first child, but the second child, you have a tendency to be a little bit more stricter. So In the budget for SAM, we have a cushion, 25 extra positions, in case we need to help with that transition. Next year's,
What is SAM?
I'm
Excuse
sorry,
me, Mrs.
staff
Smith.
allocation model.
Thank you.
Okay. Next year, we'll look at SAM again, see how we executed the implementation, where some refinements can be done. The board may have initiatives, may want more reading, may want more math, may want more PE. We'll look at that. Every year, based on funding, the SAM can change. Ratios can go up, ratios can go down. Also, during this year, under the superintendent's leadership, we realigned divisions, and we started out this year with a plan. How can we cut requirements? The initial plan was approximately $2 million reduction in divisions and approximately $1.9 million at schools. We came in at 4.5 million reductions versus 3.9. Outstanding accomplishment under the superintendent's leadership. The budget also was a little bit delayed because of executions by DOE. We did not get the second FEFP calculation until Friday at 3 p.m. However, one piece of document was still missing, and that's the certification of the final millage. That was not received until Friday, July 17th, until 5/16. Until I get those documents, I can't finalize. I'm missing my final certification and the final required local effort. Those are two key items that are required for the ad. The ad is what you will be approving tonight. Ad will be approved tonight, posted on the 24th, then on the 28th, we come back for our final budget meeting. Well, there we'll adopt the tentative millage rates and the tentative budget. Nothing will change between then and there. Following that meeting in September, we'll have the final budget meeting. Your millage rates won't change. Your revenue shouldn't change unless you get a grant or two in. But keep in mind, we're only 20 days into the end of the year. We still have not finalized last year's roll. We still haven't finalized everything. So you might see some slight adjustments. Also, if you get a grant, any additional money coming into the district will also be reflected then. Okay? The major changes as a result of the final millage and the second calc is originally it was thought that we would have a proposed, we have three ads, tentative budget, capital outlay, and you have to give notice either a budget hearing or a proposed tax increase. It's all based on the calculations. Original thought, the notice would actually be a proposed tax increase, which the district has had for the last 3 years. This time it is only a budget hearing. So what this implies is the average taxpayer in Indian River will pay less in taxes next year than they did last year. It's a very small amount. But the math on the calculation dictates which ad you use. Of course, all these ads are dictated by Department of Revenue. Overall, when we got the final calculation in, the first calc and the second calc had our tax values at about $1 billion over. Therefore, will be adjusted down and a slight reduction in required local effort. Overall impact to the budget is a reduction of about $800,000, very small. Keep in mind also, through the legislative action toward the end of the year, they eliminated the lottery money, which was about $600,000. But that money flows in and flows out, so it was a net wash. Also, one of the key factors leading into the new year budget is how did you end last year? How did you end your fund balance? Last year, 2019, we had a 12% ending fund balance. And that calculation is just ending fund balance over your total revenue. For July 2020, we're at 11%. So again, we stayed very healthy to double-digit ending fund balance. And of course, for 2021, we have our 5% budgeted ending fund balance in the budget already, which is approximately $7.7 million. With that, I'm open for questions, or we can go into look at individual pages that may have had some slight changes in the book.
I'm ready. All right, you have questions?
I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you for your diligence in all the questions that I had for going through specific line items and getting back to me right away on the question I had about a particular school and what was happening with their sewage and garbage and water because it inflated so high. Thank you for understanding about chillers and how that affects that. So hopefully we'll see electricity going down in those schools where we see those numbers going up. So I appreciate that. I did go through all of this, and I'm sure my fellow board members did. I would like to just say, can we just look at the changes as we go through? Would that be okay, since this is a very thick book, and I'm sure you've gone through it? Okay? Thank you.
Zork, I have a comment. Thank you. When we're talking about the budget, I think the school district has attracted a lot of attention over the past few years, and that's a great thing because hopefully people are watching this budget hearing, this budget workshop, and understanding how we receive our funds and how we spend them. So if we can make an effort possibly when we're using acronyms to say what it is clearly and define some of the things, because I think someone new to the district, and especially a parent, may not know what SAM is, may not know what a staff allocation model is, and may not understand the work that's been done or know about the work that's been done since Dr. Moore's arrival here and with Mrs. and Dr. Moxley's work towards a staff allocation model. So if we could do that. As far as the budget hearing versus a proposed tax increase, every little bit helps. We are asking voters for an additional millage this year, so it's good to know that while we're not able to control the required local effort, that we are in fact not taxing more within that required local effort. So that's really good to know. So thank you, Mr. Fagan.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have 385 pages to go through here. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rosario, you have a question or comment? We can't hear you.
Hi, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify a little bit what Mrs. Justice just mentioned. She said that we're adding a millage. We are not adding, it is a continuation. So I just want to make that clear for the public listening.
Okay. So, Mr. Fagan, I appreciate you taking the time and going with each board member through this budget book. I had my time with you on Friday. It was a good 2 hours, and I appreciate that. And I do agree that as we go through here, let's go through the book like you did on when you went through the reviews. But if you want to make the highlight the areas that we are changing, I think that's
Great.
a good suggestion.
Yes, ma'am, to the chair.
And any other, because you've been doing this for a while, so however else you feel that we need to be presented this.
All right, thank you, ma'am, through the chair. All right, so if we look at the document,
Just quick, my recommendation, Madam Chair, is that we provide a detailed presentation from start to finish and provide opportunities to respond to the questions and changes as we move through this document. So my recommendation is we provide the complete presentation. You know, if it's page by page and that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. But really a comprehensive presentation to you that allows those individuals who are watching to fully understand the depth of the work that has been done by Mr. Fagan, as well as the in-depth analysis each and every single one of you has taken in questioning and providing feedback to Mr. Fagan as we've created this budget.
Thank you. This is, and I have no problems with that.
Mrs. Orr.
We are 9:30 to 11:30, so if we need to schedule another budget workshop, I am fine with doing that.
You can do it.
Go ahead.
Question. That's fine. I totally get educating the public, and I didn't mean to gloss over that at all. What I'm saying is, if you could highlight the changes, though, because this is a very intense document, and having gone through it all,
5 pounds.
right, having gone through it all with you twice, I would like to make sure I understand what changes you made since our last meeting.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go.
All right, if we can all turn to page 7. Introductory letter, at the very top, we basically get into the content of the impact of COVID. So, and despite COVID, 2 key items is one, we were able to end the year with a good healthy fund balance of 11%, and of course, begin the year with a healthy fund balance of 5%. The budget overall, as we indicated, the district staff allocation model was fully implemented. So what this means is all positions are fully funded and fully budgeted. Not based on prior year expenditures, but based on full year requirements and staffing allocation model. Also, the CARES grant, approximately $3.3 million of the CARES grant was allocated to the district. That money has also been allocated and budgeted. We have not received official acceptance or approval from DOE, but it is expected shortly. There was a couple of questions regarding the grant, very insignificant. They said it looks great, great detail. We'll get you your confirmation here shortly. The biggest thing in the CARES grant, of course, remember, you have to share with charter schools and non-privates. But the biggest portion of that for the district is the funding of the 21 new counselors and the success coaches. And that is because DOE's original guidance for the grant was whatever you want. Then they came back in and said it's got to be something new. Well, luckily, we put in school counselors at all the elementary schools that qualified immediately, and then the success coaches. So then the rest of the document is for reimbursement and expenditures for sanitation and a few PD requirements for the school. So also, yes, I'm sorry.
Mrs. Justice?
Thank you. Yes, so the CARES grant, I understand the county received, I believe, $9 million. We received $3 million. The direction was you could use it for anything. The direction then came that needed to be something new. I'm sure parents and different people in our community are wondering how different PPE, different safety and health and safety devices that we're buying or utilizing in our schools is being paid for. Some people might think that the CARES Act might pay for something like that. So can you just talk quickly about that? I know we don't want to delve into that area, but it's a question that's been asked.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. The CARES Act has some elements of our PPE equipment, so sanitation, mask, the disinfectant equipment. It has some of the equipment that we're going to be utilizing for next year's budget for protecting children and staff. Other part of those requirements are coming from the district discretionary funding. So it's basically a two-pronged approach. If we can get it in CARES, we're going to put it in there. If there's not enough in CARES, then we have the balance being funded by general fund.
Thank you.
Mrs. Berenberg?
Thank you. As soon as I can get in and do it officially through Teams, I will. You mentioned counselors being included in the CARES Act. Is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that act only gives us funds for this year, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
So we're funding counselors this year through CARES.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a projection of how we're going to fund them in the future?
That'll be funding from future funding allocation from the state. That'll be coming out of general fund.
Okay. So that's something we need to pay attention to because of the last time when we put teachers out on millage and we had to bring them back into the general fund. So I just want to make
Yes,
sure.
ma'am.
Okay.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, also in the budget, I know that we moved around a lot. Can you hear me okay? I'm
Yes,
staticky on
you're
this.
great.
Okay. We moved around some of the ESE support and we put them into some, not exactly coaching and counselor roles, but in different, we moved them from where they were in ESE elsewhere. Can you clarify that this has nothing to do with that?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. The changes in the ESE positions was that in prior budgeting practices, some of your pre-K instructors and teacher assistants were actually classified in the pre-K facility, for better explanation, which is basically just an accounting term of where these individuals were accounted for, but they actually were pre-K teachers and pre-K teacher assistants. Well, we basically pulled them out of that allocation. Nothing got cut. We just basically reappropriated them. But the CARES Act has nothing to do with ESE students or ESE support staff.
Okay, since we are talking about
Can I
CARES.
follow up?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I wasn't going to ask this, but that's actually a really important point because while the CARES Act doesn't necessarily allow for additional funding for ESE students, in fact, ESE students may need considerably more resources to adhere to a lot of our social distancing and a lot of our guidelines in this. Can you speak to that a little bit? And if we are in any way, how we're going to manage that with the resources we've got, if we do anticipate that that is going to take considerably more of our resources.
We would have two-pronged approach to that through the chair. Is number one, the CARES grant is pretty much in its final form for right now. Amendments are allowed. If we get into the new year and ESE support needs more additional resources, we have two choices. One, we have money reserved for additional requirements because we knew they were going to become coming in this year. Or two, we can always go back to the CARES grant and make an amendment. So we have two potential funding sources to solve that need.
My question with the CARES, it's about 2.7 million that we're getting from this, and the other portions are going to the charters and then the private schools, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do we foresee and what requirements that we have to meet through Tallahassee and and other demands, do we see that we are not getting enough funding through CARES to cover this coming school year for our safety and all the things that are necessary to open up safely?
Through the chair, that's an open-ended question. It depends on how far you want to go to provide support and equipment. Based upon our requirements we have right now, we believe we have sufficient funding to meet our needs. If we want to go to the next level, that might cost additional funding.
And the next level is,
Whatever level is determined by the board and the superintendent, that we want to
Okay.
enhance the protective equipment for our students and staff, what would that be? If you wanted to put up plastic partitions around every child, that would be a new requirement. If you wanted to have everyone have a hazmat suit on, that would be another requirement. If you wanted to expand the classrooms and bring in portables to space children out. It
Right.
depends on the current reopening plan that we have sufficient budget to cover those requirements.
okay, perfect. And then while we're on this, the new counselors, I do have that same concern, Mrs. Berenborg, whenever you mention it's one-time funding, so
Right.
it, but when we get to our legislative platform, I know last year we had mental health a part of that. I hope that we can add that again in, because if we can cover it this year through the CARES, and then try to work with legislation to get that extra, especially during this time.
Also, if I can add, in my experience, when you get federal money, one of your key requirements is to spend federal money first. So in this example, we move the counselors into CARES. Well, the hope is that, okay, if that $2 million is now not needed in general, you bankroll it. So that when you roll into next year, that requirement is covered by that savings. So you increase your ending fund balance and you say, okay, now I didn't have the CARES, I have the extra $2 million, now I'm okay. Third year, depends on funding.
Right. Okay, perfect. All right. We ready to move on? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Fagan.
Okay. Also, if you remember correctly, we had a slight increase in health insurance and FRS. The requirements for FRS and the health insurance is also fully budgeted in all positions. Also, the state will come to us sometime during the third quarter for McKay and Family Empowerment Scholarships as a deduction to our budget. That's been fully budgeted with a slight increase to account for the slight increase in the family empowerment. We will not know that actual calculation until the third, but we've got approximately 1.2 budgeted and allocated for that. So it won't be any scrambling around when that comes in.
Mrs. Rosario?
Hi, yeah. Mr. Fagan, did you change pages? Because you did it, we were still on page 7.
I can't say that. Can you repeat that?
Did you change pages, Mr. Fagan, for the public following? Because we were still on page 7 in the previous.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, I'm still on page 7 of 385. Are you
Okay.
on the old book or the new book?
I'm on the book you gave me last week.
Old book.
That's the old book. You will need, can you get online and look at the online version? We had
Yes,
some- We had some,
I can do that, but if we change pages, can you just remember to announce the page you're on? I can certainly do that.
yes, ma'am, through the chair.
So, also, board members, if you're speaking, can you please speak directly into the microphone? Because when you're speaking where you're sitting, you're very, very far, and it's very low. Your voice is very low. It's very hard to hear you. So if you can do that, I'd appreciate it.
I will try to speak up.
Through the chair, I will work on my theater voice.
Bring the mic in.
Can I just add to that, though, because I can hear you guys better than I can hear Mrs. Rosario. Mrs. Rosario, I think it may have a lot to do with your connection, because I'm barely hearing you, but I can hear the board members better.
All right, I'll put on my microphone.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fagan?
Mrs. Zork,
Yes.
thank you. I'm asking to comment.
And go ahead.
Thank you very much. In working with other districts around the state, are you seeing an increase in the empowerment grants, or is that how much of an anticipated increase are districts looking at because of the current situation?
Through the chair, that's difficult to say. Last year to this year,
Yeah.
the expected increase is double.
Wow.
we approximately got hit with 300,000. We expect because of the change of going up to the 29,000 students about going to 600,000. A couple of the districts I've talked to, they're anticipating almost a double impact.
Okay,
Don't know, won't know that till the actual third.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay? All right, through the chair, we're on page 4 of the old book,
Ooh, okay.
page 8 of the new book. Third paragraph down, there was a change there. The additional income, revenue from the second count was supposed to be 4.8 million. Now it's only about 4 million. Moving on to page 7 of the old book, 11 of the new book. This is one of the 3 ads we will be approving tonight. The original document contained an ad that said we were going to have to do a notice of a proposed tax increase. The actual ad will be a notice of a budget hearing. This is primarily because of the additional revenue generated based on the change in the millage rate, and the change in the property values is actually less. Next, page 8 and 9 is your capital ad of the old book, and 12 and 13 of the new book. The only change in this document was the millage rate at the very top, left-hand corner, where before it said 5.069 is now 4.8960. That is because of the change in the required local effort that was received on Friday.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, quick thing, Mr. Fagan, going back to the ad for a second, can you clarify, because I know we've spoken about it, can you clarify that the wording was changed? You mentioned why it's not an increase, it's actually a decrease, but can you clarify for anybody listening that how this is connected to property values, and that the millage is directly proportionate to if property values increase, then this changes if property values decreases. Can you just speak to that for people who want to better understand this process?
Yes, ma'am, through the chair. What these 2 ads basically tell the community is, should I be expecting a tax increase on my property for next year? It's all based on prior year's tax values and the prior year millage rate compared to 2021's millage rates and the tax values. Since our millage rate went down and the property values did not increase significantly, when you do the math, that actually is a decrease. When you, quote, have a decrease, Department of Revenue says, just post a budget hearing. If you have an increase, you have to do the proposed tax increase. So in a nutshell, in the proposed tax increase, basically we state that the taxpayer would experience a 1% increase in their tax bill. In this example, it's actually a decrease, which we get to, is called the rollback rate. Average taxpayer should see approximately a 0.10% decrease in their tax bill. And again, the millage rates that we impose are the millage rates required by Department of Revenue and Department of Education. We're not imposing anything anymore other than our 0.5 millage, but that's voted on. We don't deviate anything from that. If we fail to vote and approve the millage rates, then we run subject to not receiving your FEFP money from the state through your FTE, which is approximately $50 million.
I don't think anyone's going to oppose a decrease. I don't see that.
Okay.
So thank you for that explanation.
Okay. Next ad is on page 14 of the old book. And, excuse me, 10 of the old book, 14 of the new book. This is your tentative budget. Numbers that changed were directly related to the change in the millage rate and the second calc. So your millage rate changed at the top. It was originally 3.662, went down to 3.648. And that, of course, affected the revenue stream that you're getting from your state and local dollars. Therefore, the state sources increased a little bit, local sources went up a little bit. That therefore affected my appropriations, the $115 million in yellow, which ultimately affected the overall budget, but just a slight increase of about $1 million. But again, all triggered by the second calc. Moving on, next section is,
Mrs. Zork?
Mrs. Barrenborn?
Yes, I finally got on Teams, so thank you. All right, question, could you explain a little bit about the line item that says community services on there? Because you'll see it comes from the enterprise fund, and I think the wording enterprise fund maybe needs an explanation as to what that means.
yes, ma'am, through the chair. The enterprise fund is your extended day program.
Right,
That's all that is. Fee for services, you have to segregate it through general accounting principles. You do not want to commingle any of that money with any other funding source. It stays within itself, it funds itself, it's fund balance rolled forward, and it's all self-contained.
okay, and because of what happened with COVID, is that why that number's gone down so much?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Dr. Schiff, do you hear me better now?
Oh, yes.
Yes? Okay. Okay, thank you. Mr. Fagan, when we went through this, something that was significant to me was the ending fund balance of $314 million. Last year, we were approximately 289, and I'm not exactly, I don't have the exact number, but when we talked, it was approximately about that amount. So right now, we're closing on this sheet, I'm still on page 14, much better than we were last year. You've already talked about some of the specific changes, but can you in a quick summary, can you just remind the public the benefits of the choices that were made since Dr. Moore has come on and since you have really had a chance to reallocate some of these funds in different places, why we are ending on a higher, with a higher fund balance than we were last year. One of those areas that I know that has made a significant change were some of the budget cuts that Dr. Moore, some of the positions that were unfilled when Dr. Moore came on board that were taken off of the table until he and you were able to fully look at the budget. I know the staff allocation model was also something that played a part in this, but could you, in your words as our CFO, explain the difference in that?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. One point of clarification, the $300 million is our total budget, not necessarily our ending fund balance. It includes your ending fund balance, but the $300 million is your actual total budget.
You're on mute.
It says here transfers and balances both.
Correct. Yes, ma'am, both.
I'd like to have an
Okay,
ending
that's
fund
what I was
balance of
talking about.
$300 million.
Okay, just want to make that point of clarification. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. One of the major changes between last year's budget and this year's budget is when we came in with the initial budget for last year, it was basically a modification of the prior year's actual expenditures that was created as the 1920 budget, loaded into the system, and then off and running for the year. It really wasn't based on true allocation of positions and a true scrub of what requirements does each division and each school actually need for the year. Under Dr. Moore's leadership, each division was looked at regarding positions. Any positions not ultimately as being critical and best by kids were reviewed, looked at, and either reallocated or reduced. That is the primary focus of SAM. What do the principals need in order to run their organization? What is the minimum requirement they can get by? And then what are the uniqueness of individual schools that may require them to have extra positions as needed? So when you look at the change from the prior year, you've got an increase of $12 million from budget to budget. 3.8 of that is in general fund. That's basically the $3 million that you got from the state to do your salary increases. The other $800,000 is miscellaneous revenue, fund balances, et cetera. So that's the biggest change. Debt service went up approximately 1.6. That's primarily an increase in your sinking fund requirements because you have a, I can't remember the name of the bond, but it's a bond that we borrowed in order to build a school or and making capital improvements, and it has a sinking fund requirement that matures. That debt service is $26 million, so every year we put away about $1.6 million, $1.8 million into a balloon payment that is due. So every year that debt service will go up. Capital expenditures increased $3.8 million. That's simply a combination of your impact fees. Remember, you collect 1.6 in impact fees, but you are going to spend them over the next couple of years. So every year you get that money, you don't spend it, along with some other projects, you're going to continue to increase that fund balance. At some point in the future, that will go down because you would have expended those funds. Group insurance went up approximately $2.2 million. That's primarily because of a $1.2 million increase in your premiums and also an increase in your ending fund balance. Health insurance fund balance is right now very healthy and also slightly increasing because of COVID. Now, you would think COVID would cause more health care. Not really, because everybody's electing not to do the elective surgeries. So you've had a decrease in some utilization. Your cares are still open, everything is fine, but simply you don't have people going into those elective surgeries. You might see a spike next year, it depends on what happens. Since you didn't spend it, your fund balance will increase. And the enterprise fund went up approximately, which is extended today, approximately $181,000, and that's because they didn't spend as much, but they still had a healthy fund balance, and it just rolled. So those all contribute to about a $12 million increase from the prior year, which is why we are stronger today than what we were in prior year.
Thank you very much.
All right, through the chair, next section is strategic plan, starting on page 15 of the new and 11 of the old. There were no changes in this section. This is a few pages that highlight the strategic plan, which is still in draft, but we wanted to make them a part of the document because that's the driving force for the district and each and everything that we do for each and every other child. Staff allocation model is the next tab, beginning on page 21 of the new, 17 of the old. There were no changes in this section. Would like to point out a clarification on page 30 of the new. '26 of the old. And then miscellaneous funding, there's a statement that reads, the reading coach will be funded by Title I and non-Title I's will be funded by the district. Clarification is that's not necessarily the district per se, but it's funded from SAI, which is Supplemental Academic Instruction, which is a funding source that we can use to fund schools that are non-Title I for things that they need in addition to the normal allocation, which comes through SAM.
Mrs. Berenborg has a question.
Thank you for pointing that out. As you know, thank you for pointing that out. As you know, I did ask about supplanting with that because of Title I funds, so I appreciate you giving a clarification on that. And also with the allocations, there was something that I asked for. I don't see it, but a comment about WABASO and alternative ed, since they weren't included in here. I know that they are a little different as far as the allocations go, so maybe a statement or an explanation about why.
To the chair, yes, ma'am. We'll make sure and add that definitely for the final.
Thank you.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, can you just go back for a second, Mr. Fagan? You referenced page 30 of the new document for the Title I, and I'm not seeing that. Did I mishear you?
Yes, ma'am. On page 30, look under miscellaneous funding allocation.
Got it. Got it. Okay, I see it. Sorry. My mistake. I was looking for, I thought you highlighted changes in this one. My mistake. Sorry.
I think the reason why he brought it up, he didn't make a change, but I did question, what was that, yesterday? So he probably couldn't make the change in here, but I did question whether or not that looks like supplanting. So we cannot do that as a district. We cannot supplant when you have Title I funds. And I just wanted to make sure that you understand that. Do I need to explain what supplanting is?
If you choose, yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we can, if Title I funds are going to cover something, we cannot say, oh, because Title I's covering it for the Title I schools, and we need to take general fund money and put it into the other schools to make it the same. We can't do that because Title I allows for those schools that need it to get the extra to make it equitable, not equal. There. Was that perfect? Okay, thank you,
correct.
Dr. Moore.
It is a hard thing to explain, so I think you did.
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. If we could just take a moment, and I know that Mrs. Esplin is listening, I probably won't be a part of the new legislative platform that this district comes forward, or my input will be removed to some degree. So I'd like to just point this out. At some of our schools that are non-Title I schools, we have a significant number of students. Title I is based on free and reduced lunch percentages, and I'm a little fuzzy exactly what the percentage is for Title I for elementary schools, but I think it's in the 70, what is it, 73? Anyway, it's fairly high, but at some of our schools, we'll have a free and reduced lunch percentage of around 54, 55. So 55% of the students at that school are in need of the additional help that Title I funds would provide. So this is the district's way of being able to serve those students. However, going forward, I think it's important to note that the money should follow the child. That if there's a student who needs the additional resources at a school, that in my opinion, Title I funding is fine and it's wonderful for those schools, but there are students that are at that are at schools that are not considered Title I, Dr. Moore, who do not have access to some of those services that might be provided. I appreciate the fact that you're looking to be able to give them those, but going forward from a legislative perspective, I think it's important to note that each individual child deserves to be funded for the education that they deserve.
Okay, through the chair, moving on. General fund, next tab, 39 of the new, 35 of the old. I'm sorry, page 36 of the old, page 40 of the new. Slight change in the chart, basically updating the numbers based on the second calc. Page 41 is just a repeat of the add. The yellow changes are the ones we previously discussed that based on the second calc and the change in required local effort. But this is the same add. Now, of course, the add will not have the highlights. Okay. Page 43 of the new.
Mrs. Rosario?
Yes, I think Mr. Fagan's going just a little bit too fast. I'm still on page 36 of the old and page 40 of the new. What I heard you say was that there was a slight change, and then I didn't hear anything else.
Yes, ma'am, through the chair. On page 36 of the old and 40 of the new, page 40, there's two yellow highlights of the changes in the general fund and the total budget. Those were based upon the changes in required local effort and the change in the millage rates.
Okay, thank you.
On page 41 of the new, 37 of the old, that is the same page from the previously we discussed. This is your add for the tentative budget. These changes here are 9 of the old. This table here basically is an example of the impact to the local taxpayers. Is our millage rate went down from the prior year, 0.173. The original estimate was a reduction of 0.159. So the yellow on page 43 is the new calculation. So average millage rates for the school district actually went down. The only one that changed was required local effort. A homeowner with a $200,000 property with a $25,000 homestead would basically see a $30 reduction. Homeowner with a $200,000 home that actually increased in property values, 6%, but had the 3% Save Our Homes, would actually see approximately an $8 increase. Again, remember the property values go up, your millage will always have whatever the millage is, generally you will always have an increase. Slight increase. This is one of the smallest increases in the last couple of years. Overall tax value went from 19.9 billion to 20.4 billion, or a 2.61% increase in taxable values. That was also another change between the first calc and the second calc and the certified millage. First calc came out from the House budget, was slightly almost $21 billion. So $1 billion will make a dramatic impact on the overall budget.
And Mr. Fagan, we start receiving our 2021 funds from the tax collector around November? Is that correct?
The chair, yes, ma'am.
How is it looking on us going out on a TAN?
Based on preliminary estimates right now, we do not anticipate to have to issue a TAN for this year.
And that is fantastic news. So I appreciate you working through the budget to make sure that that doesn't happen this year.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next,
Oh, Mrs. Barrenborn?
Yes, we are going to get into more of a discussion on the TAN when you get to that page, correct?
through the chair, or we can do it now.
Oh, we can do it now. Do you know the page that it's on? I don't have it memorized.
Is it under additional?
Give me a minute.
I know it was at the top.
Don't know off the top of my head. Legal fees. Page 60 of the new. Is that the page, Ms. Barrenborn?
Mm-hmm. And what page would that be of the old? Because I have it highlighted in my comment. 60. Here it is,
57.
63.
63.
I just wanted to highlight that the TAN that we talked about last year, we were anticipating actually making money from this TAN. Remember, I was concerned about going out for a TAN at all because of this concern. It cost us money. So it cost us, what, $24,000?
224,000.
Oh,
Keep in mind that's before your net interest that you earned on the TAN. Remember, you still have to
Okay.
pay interest.
okay,
And you got to pay closing costs. You got to pay your closing costs. Overall, the overall TAN net to the district was approximately 23,000. So
Okay,
you
so
borrowed
the net.
$14 million from August to April. So you earned interest. We locked in a rate because the rate continued to decline throughout the year. We locked it in at about 1.75. By the end of the year, it was less than 1. So that was allowed us the ability to recoup almost all of our costs, net to net, of about 23,000.
okay. So my point is this. If we're talking about a legislative platform going forward, and we are lucky enough to not go out for a TAN this year, that doesn't necessarily mean next year is going to be the same bushel because of possible budget cuts next year.
Not possible.
Yeah, okay. So for that, maybe we can be proactive and put this on our legislative platform for next year to, I've already kind of discussed this with our legislators because I was that person to go out and talk about that a little bit, is my concern of why some districts have to be put into this position where we have to go out for a TAN, where we don't get our tax rolls until November, and yet we have salaries to cover in October. So to put us in that position constantly where our required local effort is not hitting us in October, we want to make sure that maybe we can talk to our legislators about looking at that. Because it only affects a few districts, but we're one of those that it affects. So I think that we need to really look at that as a platform. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Mr. Fagan, just one second, Dr. Schiff, I just saw your name here. Approximately percentage of districts that go out for a tan, do you have that number?
When we went out, through the chair, we went out for the last one, out of 60 some odd districts, about 10 or 12 went out.
10 or 12, okay. Yeah, I've never liked tans, so I appreciate, and I wanted to highlight that. I already knew the answer, but I wanted to allow you to brag on it because you've done such a good job on that. So I appreciate that. So we're going to have Dr. Schiff.
Thank you. Just to clarify and put this into context a little bit also, as I recall, the previous year's TAN went out very late. It went out in October, and because it went out late, it actually cost the district something like $50,000, give or take. It may have been a little more than that. And so while this cost us something we didn't anticipate, because we went out when we did, it may have saved us the higher fees that happened in previous years for a short-term note. And so I wonder if you can comment on that. Secondly, you said it does not look like we're going to have to go out for a TAN this year. I know you well enough to know you'll keep us well apprised of that. But at what point do you anticipate we'll have a better sense of that? Because where we get into trouble tends to be around the August, September, October mark. Can you speak to that a bit?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. First question regarding the cost of the TAN. When you go out for, there's two options for a TAN. One is a bank note, which you basically go down to your local bank and say, I'd like to do a TAN. Generally, it will cost you more, but you will have it for a lesser period of time, and you will pay it back as soon as you get your funding from the county, which is generally November-ish. So therefore, usually the interest rates are higher, but your issuance costs are less. When you go out for a public TAN, your issuance cost is higher, but you'll get a better interest rate because you're going out to the market. It's really a cash flow question. If you can borrow as much money as possible, lock in your interest rate, and extend it as long as possible, generally you'll do better in the public sector. If you get into a cash crunch, which would be where we would be looking at expenditures starting right now in July, looking at August, looking at the cash balances, and then predict where we're going to be by mid-November when we get that first big check from the county. The object is to watch your cash expenditures, minimize what you can, and stretch those dollars as long as you can. Also, looking at all cash balances, just not necessarily general fund cash balances. Maximizing the use of all cash.
Mm-hmm. Which in effect is what we did this year. By going out early, we were able to put it out to public bid, so we got a lower rate and extended it over a longer period, as I hear you saying, which in effect cost us less than had we had to do so at the last minute. Correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
And at the moment, we anticipate not doing that at all, which, given that we've done it for the last 2 years, and I'm not sure beyond that, you may know that better than I, that's actually a really good thing and speaks to the health of our funds. Is that true?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. It speaks to the health of your funds and also the health of your cash flow.
Perfect.
So we could say that our cash, while we may not be getting the resources we need to provide the level of services from the state, what can be said about this is that we are in fact managing our money far better than we have done so in the past. Would that be a correct statement?
I would say it's a consolidation basis of looking at cash versus on an individual fund basis.
And because we are doing that, we are in better financial shape, not because of what we're taking in, but because of how we're now managing the money, which is a departure from the past. Is that true?
Through the chair, I can't necessarily comment on what was done prior to my arrival. I can just say, looking at what I've seen since I've been here, the way the cash was reported, the way the cash was accounted for, the way we were able to look at it, we're looking at it in a slightly different element today.
Okay. So that's a yes.
Well, I hear the gentleman not wanting to confirm a yes, to not speak to past practice before he was here. But what I'm hearing is that since he's been here, he has changed the ways in which we manage the money, which is resulting in better cash flow and thus decreasing our need to have to go out for a TAN either long-term or at the last minute. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, that's what I'm hearing
To the
too.
chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay, Mrs. Barrenborg
Thank
has
you.
a comment or question?
Yeah, I do want to add to that. I appreciate the fact that you're managing our money better, and that was a stipulation that a legislator asked me. Are we managing our money the best way possible in order to have the cash to be able to pay salaries in October? My concern is what's going to happen next year. And I think that's why we need to be proactive and put this on our legislative platform. Because I think that you can manage money so much, but if you don't have the money to manage, then you've got a problem. So I just think that we need to talk to our legislators about how these districts that have to go out and get this, how unfair is it to them that their required local effort is going to help fund other schools, and yet their local schools are hurting because of it. And I don't think that's fair. So, thank you.
Do you think, since we're talking about this, because you are legislative liaison, do you think next board workshop that we could have a discussion on?
I think we
all
should.
this? Yeah,
I think
it's
we should
time.
do it immediately because I think they're starting to look at what they want to put forward as far as legislation. And I think that that's something that we need to start talking to our legislators
Yes,
about.
so I would love it if you would put that on for
Sure.
our next workshop, and then we'll go into that, because I think we need to also converse with the other 10 and 12 counties that Mr. Fagan had mentioned to see if they might want to join us on the platform.
Sure. Mr. Fagan, can you please send me who those counties are? Thank you.
All right. Mrs. Justice?
Yeah, I know that we need to move on because we're running out of time, but that was kind of a good overview, but fuzzier explanation of exactly why property-rich counties end up coming into trouble because state money comes out throughout the year in a more level fashion, and our money ends up coming because we have our property-rich county, and other counties like that also suffer because their state funding is less than that percentage is less than other counties. So I think that's important. That's something important to define when we have a conversation about it, and I look forward to the workshop.
Board members, I know our meeting is from 9:30 to 11:30, but this is very important work that we're doing. This is part of our job, is making sure that we understand this budget, and when we go to approval, we understand every line item. So yes, we need to stay on task, but I don't want us to feel rushed through this. And if need be, if we get to 11:30 and we're only halfway through the book, I propose that we schedule another workshop on this, because this is important work that we're doing today. So Mrs. Rosario, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I'd like to ask if you can repeat what you said before talking to Mrs. Barrenborg. You said something, you were turned face to her, and I didn't hear anything.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
So what I was just asking Mrs. Barrenborg, with her being our legislative liaison, is at the next board workshop session, I believe that's on July 28th, is I had asked her to put on the agenda for us to discuss our legislative platform for the upcoming legislative session. I think it's timely and we need to get this going. That's what I had said.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Can I just add? I'm on, right?
Yeah.
Can I just add that if any board members have an idea of something they'd like to put on the legislative platform, if you could get that to Nancy, and then I'll include that on the agenda. Okay? Thank you.
Through the chair, moving on, just for informational purposes, the budget, 63% of your funding is coming from local, 36 is coming from the state. 63% is coming from local, 36 is coming from the state.
Can you put that in dollar values from the state? If we're being told 10 to 20% from the state, we need, the perspective of that dollar amount.
Approximately 88 million from local, 50 million from the state.
Okay. And if we're being given information that possible 10 to 20% reduction in state funding for education, that's going to come out of that amount, the the 50 million, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. That'd be somewhere between $5 and $10 million.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, moving to page 44 of the new and 40 of the old. Since we did not have the second calc, the first book only shows a comparison between the fourth calc and the first calc. Page 40, we inserted 2 columns in yellow that show the difference between the second calc and the fourth calc. This is an indication of a slight reduction of your $800,000 that we spoke about on line 31 at the bottom, and the different changes for each of the funding sources. The biggest change here is they did away with the lottery money. So of your $800,000, $650,000, $700,000 of it is your lottery money.
Do you have a question? Go ahead. I know you did. You didn't put your comment in there.
I didn't.
But I see you
You
waving
could-
your hand
you-
over here.
I was kind of going like this, like, here's why. I remember when lottery was voted on, and I was a teacher in the district, I believe, when that happened. And it was interesting because lottery was going to go towards education, right? But when you look at the dollars, what happens is, yes, they say, oh, lottery goes towards education, but really what happens is the money is just replaced somewhere else, and they take the money out of the general fund and they throw it somewhere else. And so really, it's just replacing dollar for dollar a lot of times. I can't say always, but a lot of times. And it's interesting that they can pull that money, though, directly out of education and not replace it from general. That, I want to make that comment because I feel like a lot of times people think, well, the lottery money is, lottery's down, so that's why it's down. But if it's up, we don't see the increase. So I just want to make that comment because it does bother me.
Mrs. Rosario?
Yes, Mr. Fagan, can you point out again where it is or where it is not anymore? You said the biggest difference is that they did away with the lottery numbers, the lottery funding, and then you pointed to a particular place. I'm just trying to find it.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm on page 40 of the old, and
44.
Yes,
forgot
ma'am,
where
through
the
the
new
chair.
one is.
On the old page 40, it was your line 22.
line 22. Okay,
And in the new
And then-
book, page 44, it's also line 22.
okay. Mr. Fagan, why did they do away with it? Do we know?
I believe it was based upon the governor's direction. Basically, remember, he did not sign the final budget until, I believe, June 28th, and there was all those vetoes that he processed. This was one of his last-minute adjustments to the budget.
But we don't know why, right?
No, ma'am.
Do you know? Do you suppose that there might be a possibility this might come back?
To the chair, possibility,
Maybe not.
yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering now what happens with all of that. I'm just more curious. We may not have an answer. I'm just more curious
Right.
in conversation as to, all of these funds benefited our kids, public schools, and why is it not happening now? Just we may not have the monies, but as a parent watching this or a community member watching this, they might have the same answers. So that's why, the same questions. That's why I was asking that.
Mrs. Bear, do you
Through-
want to answer, Mrs. Rosario, or is that just
No,
you're
I mean,
making
it might have just been
statement?
rhetorical. I
Okay.
asked Mr. Fagan if he knew why. He said no, he didn't.
Okay.
And the rest was pretty much more comment than anything else.
Perfect, thank you. Mrs.,
Yeah, quick comment on
Ehrenberg?
that. I see next to it says school recognition, and I know that was one of the things that they were looking at changing is how schools get recognized. I'm wondering whether or not the lottery money is just taken out of the school recognition money, or is it total lottery money that's gone?
Through the chair, total.
Total lottery,
When the,
okay.
di- when the
So it's
governor,
not just school recognition money, it's all of it?
correct, through the
Okay.
chair, when the governor amended the budget, He cut $135 million out of the educational budget.
Okay, so now the lottery cannot advertise that they're going towards education. Just saying. Okay.
Mr. Fagan, can you speak to line 13 of page 44 of the new book, Florida Teacher Salary Compensation, the $3 million increase? Can you speak to the number of positions that is allocated for?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. That $3 million is part of the teacher salary increase, moving teachers up to 47.5. We are currently reviewing current teachers right now as to where they are in order to get a better handle exactly how many. Last estimate was about $2 million of that money would be used to get teachers to the 47.5, and then the balance would be distributed based on statute. But we haven't finished that analysis as of yet.
So if it's distributed, does the statute say that it can go into the other teachers' salaries?
I've read the statute, but it's been a little while, but it has specifics as to how the balance can be spent.
Okay. So do we foresee this coming next year, I'm hoping, because they're implementing it for this year's budget. I'm hoping we get it again next year. But is this something that is typical in your history of over giving to the school districts, or do you foresee that they're going to take this back down to the real number, which is going to be the 2.4 million, and then if we give out the million to the other teachers, how are we as a school district going to make sure that we're not giving something this year that we can't give next year?
To the chair, my experience has been is once they put something like this as a line item, they'll carry it for a couple of years, and then they'll bury it in the BSA.
Okay.
They will take it out of requirement because it's not truly a categorical funding like class size. They will take it and they will eventually move it into the BSA, and then the districts will have to fund it based upon future fundings and the BSA amounts. Generally, it will not stay. Many years ago, there was an item called a teacher salary allocation of millions of dollars that they did the same thing with. They allocated it to the districts for a while, and then they did away with it, and they increased the BSA a certain amount, but it may not have been equivalent to the same amount the district received in the prior year as that line item.
But I would expect this to come back to us as a budget amendment if we were to have to change the allocation, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you. Mrs. Maddox, is that Dr. Schiff?
Thank you. I want to go just back to a couple of things, and I have a comment. Mr. Fagan, can you go back to, you said the governor cut, what was the number you said out of the education budget?
Through the chair, $134 million was originally allocated for lottery and recognition.
Okay, so it was just the 134, it wasn't an overall, okay, a cut.
134 million.
Okay, thank you. And you know, one of the things I hear my fellow board members doing is asking Mr. Fagan to look into a crystal ball, which I wish he had. But I don't know that we can ask questions about where is this going and how is this going to happen and what does the future look like, because we have no idea. You know, if you guys know how to predict the future, that'd be awesome, and I'd love to know that skill, but I don't have it. So I understand that we're relying on his expertise as somebody who's studied budgets and does this work for a long time, but I'm not sure we can say to him, do you anticipate X, Y, or Z will happen, unless he's got some clairvoyant powers I'm not aware of. This year, too, to clarify that in the allocation we get, and I know we've said this, but I want to reiterate, when we get a particular allocation, we are now required to elevate starting teacher pay. So that money comes out of the allocation off the top. We have to do that. We are gubernatorially mandated to take a significant percentage out of the state allocation and put it into that category, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
And then also I just want to clarify for anybody listening, when you say BSA, you're referring to the base student allocation. Just want to clarify that acronym.
To the chair, yes, ma'am. Base school allocation.
Thanks.
Mrs. Rosario?
Mr. Fagan, can you talk about line 14 for those unfamiliar with the best and brightest and the principal allocation? Can you explain why there is no amount in the 2021 school year
Through the
line
cha-
there?
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, due to the restructuring of the budget and the increase of the $3 million for the teacher allocation, based upon legislative action, they basically did away with that bonus structure and incorporated that funding stream into the teacher allocation. This was all based on legislative action and their guidance on how to fund districts.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Oh, Mrs. Justice?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight the fact that the governor vetoed about $1 billion from the budget. And education, while it did receive some vetoes, the money to raise the minimum base teacher salary, that was $400 million, and there was another $100 million that was given to help with veteran teacher salaries. So, while I recognize that, the budget is constantly changing and moving, and we're not able to predict to a certain degree what things are going to happen in the future, there are things we can look at. We can look at some of the money that we've lost that the state is losing every month. And the state is losing a significant amount of money, billions of dollars, since March. So that's important to know. And as we look forward to the budget next year, we can also look at 2008, 2009, when we saw a recession and where school funds were cut, because history does tend to repeat itself, especially with school funding. So Mr. Fagan makes excellent points about the flexibility of using our cash or our funds as we can best use them to meet student needs, and I think that that's what the governor and the state's trying to do as well. I just like to say I'm thankful and happy that he protected those teacher salary increases.
To the chair, moving to the next page, page 45 of the new, 41 of the old. This is your revenue stream for the district. The items in yellow are simply the changes as a result of the second calculation and the change in required local effort. So it basically affected your Florida educational program, a little bit of change in class size and school tax. This is just a more detailed analysis of the revenue funding stream from the prior page. Page 46 of the new, 42 of the old. Once again, due to the changes in the second calc and the required local effort, your numbers in yellow are the same numbers from the prior pages. We just bring them forward. What this page basically demonstrates at the top is in July of 19, we ended with a 12% ending fund balance in general fund. In 20, currently right now, it's 11%. And the budget is basically a tentative budget for today, shows us with a 5% budgeted ending fund balance of approximately $7.8 million.
Mr. Fagan, can you speak to some of the reductions in that fund balance over the last couple of years based on historic?
Through the chair, for the ending fund balance?
Yes, because typically the fund balance is more than what we have. Let me rephrase that question. Over the last few years, it seems that it is going down, but can you speak to the cost of the expenses that we've had? We've talked about this, the health insurance.
Yes, ma'am. Through the chair, yes. Over the course of probably the last 5 years, you've had a couple of items that have hit your ending fund balance dramatically. One of them was the settlement for the insurance. The second one was increases in salaries and contracts. Those are your two major items. There was a balance before of approximately, say, $20 million, and that has decreased to the current value of around $23 million, and then in 2017, 18 is when you had the biggest hit of about $7 million. That was primarily attributed to salary increases and settlements with the insurance.
And charter school settlement.
And charter school settlement, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Page 47, no changes in that page. That page outlines the FTE by school and for the charter schools. currently, remember, every year, we have to do a forecast to DOE that estimates our FTE. We have to stay within that FTE figure when we push out FTE for the schools. The FTE here is also what was used to drive your staff allocation model. You don't want to give out more FTE, which therefore generates more teachers, than you're actually going to get funding for. This is the driving force that drives your FEFP money, your money based on the number of students at your schools.
Okay. Mrs. Barrenborg?
Just a quick comment about that. Will that change after the 10-day count?
Through the chair, this number will not change. Our forecast will remain whole at least through October. We may change in our school level based
Okay.
on fall count. If a school A has an additional 50 children, we'll look at that school, figure out if they have an extra 50, then another teacher will be allocated.
Okay.
But generally, in my experience, is the students have a tendency to move. We might
Within
get a
the
pick.
district.
Right. We might
So-
get a pickup because of COVID and the virtual programs that we have offered. You might pull some from some other sources, homeschool, charter schools who would like to come over here. But generally, even if we were to increase by 1,000, if we were to go to 18,000, remember when the state does the budget, they look at total FTE, and they will fund the budget based on FTE. If we simply have more and someone has less, all they do is do a proportionate. They don't give you more
Right.
because they have 50 billion for the budget, that's it. All they're going to do is just move it around.
So with this model that we're looking at with virtual and moving to schools, okay? So are we looking at those numbers, if a child's in virtual then, and they're at Citrus, they would still be considered FTE at Citrus?
Through the chair, that is the absolute right way of doing it. We want to keep students as close to their home school, choice school, magnet school as possible. So we will house all of the students who are selecting option 2 or 3 in the school and still provide that particular option. And that also provides them additional, a level of familiarity with the school counselor or the PE instructor or the fine arts instructor. So it keeps them connected to those who they've grown relationships with over the course of a number of years while still being able to provide that innovative option.
Yeah, my point being that with these 3 options, it does tie to the budget. So if we're making sure that those are going to the right schools, then that's great. Thank
Oh,
you.
Absolutely. And I know we'll talk about the options later today, but it is a comprehensive process in order to ensure that we're recreating master schedules aligned to the new options. We have significant number of individuals selecting options 2 and 3, so it is a complete rebuild of the master schedule to minimize space at each of our school sites while at the same time providing quality instruction within each of those 3 options.
Mrs. Rosario?
We lose Dr. Schiff.
Yes, Dr. Moore, I would assume that that would be the case for option 3, which is the transitional distance learning. But as a virtual school, it's supposed to be a standalone. Is that correct?
Through the chair, there is a standalone virtual school. The students in this innovative approach will have that same experience in the platform-driven, self-paced model with our teachers in the background. But since we're providing them the option to stay enrolled in their school or return to their school, whether it be an 18-week commitment, it's just a more efficient way. And speaking with parents, a great deal of the hesitation they had is going through the withdrawal process and the enroll process. So it is a virtual school. The only difference is they will remain enrolled in their particular school and conduct in that virtual school. It's just a matter of where they're going to be enrolled.
That's for the distance learning, the transitional distance learning, correct?
Transitional
Because the virtual
and
school is supposed to be a standalone virtual school, like it is a school, not connected to a public school. So the way I understand it is if a student no longer wants to be a student in, or a parent chooses not to have a student a part of a brick and mortar school and wants to put their child in a virtual school, they're not connected to anything. They're just in that virtual school as a virtual brick and mortar, I suppose.
right, through the chair, if a family wants to remain throughout the entire year, it would just be a simple shift of location. But under the transitional or the innovative approach that we're working with the state, the initial decision was made to provide that virtual school environment. And if a student wants to remain in that program, there'll be no transition, no shift or change of teacher, but ultimately just providing them that level of comfort to remain assigned to the particular school, and will facilitate all of the work in the background with teacher assignments, and following up with our teachers in terms of support.
Yeah, so I want to make that clear if you can in future, later on when we're proposing and when you come to the board for approval of the opening plan, because one of the bullet points that are in the virtual option, not the transitional distance learning, one of the bullet points actually indicate that Indian River Virtual School operates independently from the student's choice or magnet school. So I just want to make that clear that when a parent opts for the virtual school, it is not, we need to distinguish the difference between that and the transitional model. Once they're in the virtual school, like they're in, this is the school you've chosen.
Through the chair, absolutely, and we will make that clear.
Okay. Dr. Schiff, did you have a comment before you logged out? No? Okay, perfect. All right, Mr. Fagan.
Through the chair, to continue on page 48 of the new, 44 of the old, is a page outlining the current charter schools we have, their FTE, and the relative financial impact. Overall, it's about a 13% impact in FTE and about a 10% impact to budget. Approximately $18 million for the current charter schools that we currently have.
Mrs. Justice?
Thank you very much. It had come to my attention that Indian River Charter High had a number of exchange students. So I'm just wondering about reentry to the United States and those students. Do you anticipate to see their count to go down because of that, or do you have any information about that? I'm curious.
Through the chair, I had heard about that as well, and I'm looking into that and getting a copy of their contract, but right now I do not have any insight to that.
So my question would be, would there be spots of, is the Charter High anticipating that there will be additional spots open for other students in Indian River County? Because if they are not having exchange students that are returning from Asia and other places.
Through the chair, their FTE was based on prior year, so when we get to October count, we'll ask for a count, and when we get to October, we'll see what the actual FTE is. If they did have a decline because of less exchange students, FTE will go down and their compensation will go down accordingly.
And I guess the question would be, and we can talk about this at another time, the requirement to open enrollment.
Correct.
Once that happens, and if that's October, obviously that's interesting in the cycle of schooling. So, thank you.
Mr. Fagan, are you having conversations with the charter? Because are they having virtual? Do they have the virtual option?
To the chair, I do not know.
So through the chair, we are working with the virtual, with the charter schools. They are submitting their plans to us. When we submit our application to the state, it will include their plans that has been submitted to us. But they have very similar models, slight variation school by school as they have the authority to do so, but very similar.
Because I would think that if they had students that were accepted, even if they are the exchange students, that the students could also opt for the virtual option, if they're offering that. So that would be one of my questions to them.
Okay. To the chair, moving to the next page, 49. Pretty colored chart displays the taxable school base for the district since 2000 through 2000 projection through 2024. These are data is updated through the EDR, which is Economic Demographic Research of the state of Florida. They're anticipating a good increase over the next 5 years. That will be subject dependent upon COVID over the next couple of years.
This was updated in January?
Yes, ma'am. Their projections, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Keep in mind, their projections also will slightly change because we get the final tax base from the tax appraiser, so there's always a slight difference.
Now, is this only updated in January, or what's the next time they're going to update this?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. Generally, they'll update through January. They might do one at the end of the year.
Okay.
Next section is starting on page 51 of the new, 47 of the old. Board members, remember last year in July when we came we presented pages for each individual school, which is also in the book as well. That led to a conversation regarding specific programs and impact at a particular program at a particular school. It became very difficult to answer those questions because we're looking at one line item and one impact at a school. So in an attempt to provide more transparency and additional information, we created this report for last year's final and brought it for this year's tentative, is by project. So everything that you see on the school side individually, you now see as a group. Such as example, if we were to look at water and sewage, you would see water and sewage at one school is 10,000 and another one at 15. But if you look at those two schools separately, you may not necessarily see that difference. Well, when you see it by project, you may see something that say, well, why is school A at 20,000 and school B at 5,000, and they're both elementary schools? It makes you ask the question. Well, the answer to that question came up was they have chiller units. Chiller units use more water. But we also hope that in that example, their light bill would be less. So this allows you to look at the individual program across the district as well as each school is in comparison. So it allows for a better analysis. The two items, the three columns at the top were added from the prior discussions. Before, we only had a variance to budget. Now we added a variance to prior year. And then we also added a percentage change for the prior year and a percentage change to actual. The reason this is important is when you're looking at these numbers and you look at last year's tentative budget, 19-20, remember, it wasn't a budget. It was a copy of what was expended, loaded into the system. It was not truly based on true allocations. So now Sam came in for 2021. Now you did it actually based on allocations. You also did it based on an average salary. You also did it based on an increase in FRS into the average salary and also an increase in healthcare. Prior budget, those could have been line items in the budget because you knew you had to have them, but they necessarily weren't allocated at the school level or a functional level. So when you get to the net impact is a lot of the expenditures that were occurred in 1920 are very close to the budget for 2021. Also, during the course of the year, you moved people around within the schools, also funding sources. Case in point, we had an allocation for lowest 300. Lowest 300 was thought to be funded by the reading plan, but actually it was just an additional general funding. Well, those positions were moved out of that funding into the general fund, which is this 1,000 fund. So it looks like the school actually increased when really it didn't. There's another funding stream somewhere down in the report where that $300,000 may have come from. If you remember, I may have spoken about that we were basically cleaning house. You had a lot of things that were scattered, and you had a lot of things that were just there. Well, we're trying to consolidate it to put everything back into a uniform pattern that you can explain variances based upon changes in a plan, not necessarily variances changed based on funding. When you start changing the funding on positions, you have to be very careful because questions will get asked and it gets a little complicated to answer. This year's budget should be easier going forward, primarily because of three factors. One, staff allocation model. We should only be looking at positions because then you look at school A and say, what did you have last year allocated? What do you have allocated next year? You as a board member will go, that's good, no change. You got everything you needed. Next question is, how much did it cost? Did you have an increase in average salaries? Did you give a raise? Well, if you did, that's going to increase the dollar value, but board members may be more interested in positions. Nobody got cut positions. Okay, now let's talk about how we're going to fund it. Increase in health care, that'll bump up your cost. But if you start comparing cost to cost, you're not looking at positions. You're not looking at what you gave the school to function off of. Just because school A had a higher expense than school B doesn't mean you gave them less or more. It means the people at that school may have cost more. You may have your more experienced teachers at school A versus school B. You can't see that unless you're looking at a staff allocation model because you just don't know. So a lot of the variants become very complicated and somewhat hard to explain. And then if you go back a couple, 3 years, you're almost impossible now because you don't know what the methodology was. So sorry for that rambling, but I was trying to set the stage.
Okay. Mrs. Barenborg?
Yeah, actually, I put in comment before you started speaking because I knew I wanted to bring up two things, and you mentioned one of them. So thank you for explaining the lowest 300 schools and why that was pulled out of there. So I appreciate that. The other comment I had was about, my passion, which is line item 1080, General Science Lab. materials. My concern was that if we had all these schools that were starting to look at focus of STEM, and we're pulling science away from them, materials and money, I was concerned about that. So I asked for an explanation. I appreciated the explanation, and I do want to make that comment because I think it's important. We're not taking money away from them. What we're saying is, great, what do you want to spend your money on? Put that money, or put that application, or however they're going to do it, to Mr. Meyer. And then line item 9200, that's Mr. Meyer's budget for STEM, so that they can apply and spend the money in appropriate ways. My biggest concern is when you look at, I remember when FCAT came along and now STEM comes along, there are so many companies that put the label STEM on something, and then you purchase it thinking it's great because you don't know anything about STEM, and then it comes and it's not good. So I think it's great that we're going to go through our curriculum department in order to make sure that we're purchasing things that are appropriate. So I'm glad that that money's not been taken out. It's just organized better. So thank you for that. And I appreciate, by the way, this document, because I did worry about sewer and water and things like that. Because when you do see, when you're looking from school to school and you do see similar schools, I get the variance in salaries. That's no problem. I mean, it is, but I get why that's there. But I also wonder why, when you have a school that's smaller than another school and their numbers are so much higher in something, why is that happening? So I look forward to looking at whether or not chillers are going to save us in electricity. I can't wait for those numbers. Thank you.
Through the, just a small bit, because it is very timely. What our leadership teams are doing, one building over, is really looking, creating, what are their strategic plans, what are their school improvement plans moving into the next school year, what are their priorities, what obstacles do they need to overcome, and then from identifying those barriers, they will then come in and ask for those particular resources. So this morning we went over the alignment between the proposed strategic plan as well as the creation of their own school improvement plans, and that we will work to solve the problems before we spend the money and align the money to the defined barriers that we're going to overcome over the course of the school year. So that is part of the work that is taking place over there in terms of just randomly spending to spend because it looks nice or looks pretty, but being very intentional with the dollars that we do have.
Can I make a comment about that? Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that we talked about principals having monthly meetings with their supervisor about their budgets. I don't know if that's been common practice in the past. Having conversations with some of our administrators, not understanding budgets, and some assistant principals not even getting to see budgets. I think that if we're going to help our assistant principals become principals in the future, they need to understand budgeting, and not just how much money do I have to spend somewhere, but exactly what you just talked about, is how to best spend your dollars and not necessarily spend them. You know, spend them wisely, but not necessarily spend them. Thank you.
It's very, you are correct. As we grow world-class educational leaders, which is a prerequisite for a successful district, the amount of time we need to spend in looking at finances and creating a long-term plan, that support really needs to be enhanced. So we're looking forward, under Mr. Fagan's leadership, really just moving the theory of action behind spending money from a bookkeeper's perspective to the leader of the organization or the school site, the principal, and the defining how we're allocating resources in order to get that work done.
It looks like Mrs. Rosario has a comment or question.
I do. Thank you very much. Mr. Fagan, in the new book, page 54, and in the old book, page 49, say that for people who are following, for others who are following. Line number 9002 is the ESE school-wide project. And then 9015, a few lines underneath, is indicated for pre-kindergarten program, right? The 9002 ESE school-wide project, at the variance of that from 2019-2020 to 2020-21 tentative budget It's $1 million difference. What I'm seeing is a little bit more than $1 million less for ESE funding there. There's a note that says that this difference was moved to pre-K programs. And again, that other line that I mentioned, 9015, does indicate that their variance is 395,000, and the note there says moved from ESE. But what I'm noticing is that the $1 million isn't actually there. So what am I missing?
Through the chair, conceptually, I can tell you what happened, and I'll have to get back with you specifics. Overall,
Okay.
in the ESE plan, there was positions within that allocation that were shifted based when we changed the allocation of the BIS, when we restructured that ESE program. You also shifted some of those positions out of general fund into IDA. You also shifted positions that were in the ESE, that were non-ESE, that were pre-K, and they moved to the pre-K. But overall, this one line item may have some additional debits and credits that I'll have to get you the specifics on. But in general, that was the $1 million decrease. Please.
Good afternoon. Good morning, through the chair. Mr. Fagan is correct. Originally, all of pre-K was up under ESC. They were doing their own payroll. And we've really tried to clean up the budget and who's responsible for what. And so that was one of the changes. We moved all of those personnel to pre-K that were housed up under ESC. They were being paid out of ESC, but still they had the funds in the VPK. It was in those funds, but we wanted to make sure that if they were up under VPK and doing the work of VPK, that we could track that correctly, and that wasn't the case, and that was through the SAM model as well. We did a lot of cleanup in the past. We're still doing a little more cleanup as well, but that was one of the main cases, that they were not doing the payroll or anything like that through VPK. It was all done through ESC.
That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand how VPK is not paid through VPK it was then paid all through ESE funds. That just doesn't, I'm not getting something, and I understand that even what I'm looking at here in these two lines is that $1 million is taken from ESE. The note says that it's going to be transferred to the pre-kindergarten program.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not actually in that line for pre-K.
Through the chair, if I can. There's two things that are also I want to acknowledge. Kim Coltman, Director of Finance. You may give me a lot of compliments, but Kim and her team does all the heavy lifting. What you're looking at would not be here if it wasn't for her and her team. The change that you see in $1 million on that line item is also associated with the positions that were originally coded and paid for out of 9002 that are now at the SAM. They're now part of the staff allocation model. We pushed those out to be included at the school base. Some of those positions also were pushed to the pre-K, which means they didn't necessarily go to that pre-K line because other things within pre-K went out. We also put some of those pre-K positions into SAM. So again, part of the housekeeping mechanism is don't charge the division for something that is being done at the school level. If it's done at the school level, I want to charge the school level. If it's a function provided at the school level, I want to budget it and charge it accordingly. That was part of the housekeeping of being able to identify for Dr. Moore coming in, who's doing what, where, and how. Well, I've got people in my division actually at the school level. Get them out. Get them at the school. I want them charged to the school, so when you're looking at the division functionality, you're only looking at support. If you're at the school with the direct support to the students, you're being charged to the school. That's what SAM and the realignment did.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So my last question, statement, or however you want to take it, is what I'm understanding is that the notes for 9002 and 9015 are going to be changed.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
I think this is interesting because one of the challenges as a school board member is to be able to look at other districts and what they're spending on different things. And if you go to the FLDOE website and the way that schools report, it's very difficult to compare districts. And it's like apples and oranges because certain districts pay things out of the district versus schools. And when you're looking at overhead at the district or how much money are you spending at your district office, it becomes difficult when those things are happening. And that's something that's been a challenge for us. So I appreciate the fact that we're truly able to see what we're spending at schools so that we can see what our students, if our students are truly getting what they need. So I just wanted to make that note. That continues to be, that's a legislative issue. It continues to be a problem. I do believe there needs to be some type of a database for districts in general, CFOs, financial personnel, and school board members and superintendents to be able to see, you know, what the average costs are for certain things. Certain things are fixed costs, no matter how many students you have. So that was just something to remind us for the legislative platform.
Okay, we're going into school, and are we going into the next section?
Well, if I just say one comment, then we can move to the departments.
Okay.
Keep in mind also, this is only July 21st, and we're not done with last year yet. So if you were to look at some of the numbers here, you may say, well, look, looks like I'm getting actually less money than next year. And some of the funds, we haven't completed the roll yet. So like textbooks, for example. Textbooks always has a roll forward. We keep that money segregated. We haven't finished the process, so the budget-to-budget comparison may look light. There will be a note over to the side that anticipated roll of $300,000 or $400,000. When we get to the final, that number will be increased. We're just not in that process. We can't do that yet.
Okay.
Okay.
So my question is, it's 11:20. We have 10 minutes to, before this meeting needs to end because we have a very compact agenda today. So we need to be mindful of 11:30, and then through Dr. Moore, you will need to work with the board members to reschedule or to schedule another budget workshop.
So through the chair, we can discuss that later today. Ms. Dampier has been working with Nancy, so we do have a tentative date of the 28th already identified, so we'll poll the board to see if that time works or that date works with each of you. And if that does work, we will post that today because that would be a 1-week time.
Okay, that would be perfect. That
And
works out
I
great.
do want to say just the legislative priorities, I think that's an entire workshop that we would schedule. I don't want to, that is a lengthy conversation, so I think we need to schedule that as a full workshop.
Okay, so are you looking at on that same day, or is that something, are you open for that?
For the legislative workshop?
How many hours are you
No, that
thinking?
would be, I say we do that once we get school open.
Okay.
And just, I don't want to short the conversation by having a single agenda item. I think it is the entire focus of an entire meeting. And then the 28th, if that date works after Nancy pulls the board, we'll post and advertise that day to finish this up. And I just want to make sure from Ron's, what needs, is that appropriate, or are we in a good place there?
To the chair, yes, to the soup, yes, that's doable.
Okay. All right, sounds like a plan. Want to go ahead and tell, we have,
Now, through the chair, did we want to go through each page of the department and highlight some items? There was
oh,
no.
I'm sorry.
There was
Mrs.
no
Ros-
major changes in the numbers per se. We just added the variance columns to make it easier if you were comparing budget to budget or budget to actual.
Unless there's specific questions to that, board members can ask their questions, but Mrs. Rosario did have, do you have a question? I can't hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I did. It takes a second
Okay.
for me to unmute myself. And you were in conversation when I had a comment posted, and then I think you just kind of kept going. But I'm still on page 49,
Okay.
and it's a very similar, Mr. Fagan, to what we were just talking about with the notes column. Between 9223 and 9552, the variance in 9552, which is student assignment, is $452,000. The note there says that was moved to strategic planning. But when I calculate strategic planning, it doesn't come out, it doesn't add up the right way. I may be doing it wrong, but I would just ask also to take a look at the notes that are in strategic planning. In strategic planning, the note says that this was a new facility moved from student assignment. So there's a connection there, but I would just ask in general, without actually going into it right now, that when you please, and Kim, without question, Kim and her team and your team underneath you are, without question, the real rock stars behind this entire plan. So I want to thank you for mentioning them for sure, because I don't want to be insensitive to the hard work that they've all put in, without question. But when you do review this and bring it back to us, would you mind, sir, to please go over these notes and just to make sure that it is, the notes are exact where they're supposed to be, and that the movement of what has gone where actually calculates the right way, which I'm sure that you all are, but if that makes sense. Thank you.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, we will do that. Keep in mind, when individuals move around within the district between units or facilities, that is what happened, but it may not be the same people at the same rate of pay. You could have moved someone else a little bit less, a little bit more, so the numbers will not always equal out.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. But I appreciate the eye on those details.
Okay. Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't have the time to write comment. I just want to follow up if I could. I appreciate Mrs. Rosario's point about it all adding up. Because, and Mr. Fagan, when you say sometimes different things move different places, it would be helpful, as Mrs. Rosario was suggesting, to have some notation about that so that we can see if there is that discrepancy. We don't have to keep asking the same question, but we'll know why that happened.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
I'm kind of snickering, not at your comment, but because I specifically asked that question when I was one-on-one with Mr. Fagan. Because once I asked that question, he enlightened me as to why those numbers. And I think the reason why he didn't put all that in is because the notations would be so long. So just out of curiosity, I don't know how you would put those notations in to specify all the different people moving into different places, because then this book would be even thicker. But that question is one that I actually brought up, specifically asking how did those numbers change and where did those numbers come from? So thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Fagan, are you going into schools and departments? I think this would be a good stopping point
Yes, ma'am.
before we go into another complete section.
Chair, yes, ma'am.
We could have a wrap up.
Well, through the chair, just once again want to acknowledge the work of Mr. Fagan and his entire team. Ms. Rosario is right. They are the first in, the last to leave, and have done an absolutely wonderful job of prioritizing the limited amount of funds that we have. I continue to be encouraged and excited with what we're going to be able to get accomplished next year. As I told principals this morning, I think every other system in the state of Florida, probably across the nation, will use COVID as an excuse. But we continue to push forward and set a high expectation for all of our children. I think Mr. Fagan and his team have really done a absolutely outstanding job of providing and maximizing resources for principals, really to think through how they're going to get those plans that they're creating just across the street. So a successful district's foundation is its ability to finance its priorities. Mr. Fagan and his team is providing each and every single one of you with a budget you can be proud of, a budget that is transparent. And as you can tell, regardless of the questioning, whether it be individually or whether it be in this space, Mr. Fagan has the answer. It's not, let me get back to you, except for maybe one. But the ins and outs of this budget, he knows it like the back of his hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fagan, for I too want to thank the finance department. You went above and
Thank you.
beyond, and it's been very refreshing over the last several months to be working with all of you. And I agree, always has an answer, an explanation that makes sense, so I appreciate that. Having an explanation sometimes doesn't always make sense, but when I speak to you, you always can draw the line to where it goes. What I would like to do, it's 11:29 right now. Let's go ahead and adjourn this meeting, and then we have another meeting here at 11:45, correct? So, ladies, we'll come back at 11:45 for the next meeting. So I'm going to adjourn right now at 11:29.